guys, and thank you once again for giving this video a chance. If you are new to this channel, then please, before we start, can I ask that you get your fingertip ready and hit that like and subscribe button. And to my returning subscribers, thank you, and happy to see you back on here. So now let's just sit back and get into it. But if you are like me, then you are probably doing some house cleaning or cooking, baking, something in your spare time and listening to these types of videos. Okay, so today's video is about the brutal murder of Jarmecca Yvonne NIKKI Whitehead. She actually went by the name Nikki, so for the purpose of this video I will be referring to her as Nikki. And also, just a quick disclaimer, this video is for educational purposes. I mean think by no harm to anybody involved in this case. So, and I'm just giving my own opinion on this matter, and basically, yeah, just telling the story as what has been put out there. Okay, so Nikki, just looking at her videos and the pictures of her, you can see how beautiful this young woman was, and her story is quite a tragic one. I remember watching a story on her actually with my mother some time ago, and we were just sitting there like, oh my days, I can't believe that something like this happened to her. But yeah, so anyways, let me get into it. So yeah, so Nikki, as I said, she was a beautiful young woman. She was actually 34 at the time of her death. Yeah, so she was 34. She was a cosmetologist and a mother of two beautiful twin girls, Jasmiyah, who went by the name Jazz, and Tasmiyah, who was known as Taz. So on the 13th of January 2010, Nikki was found dead in the bathtub of her boyfriend's house in Georgia. This is back in America. Yeah, so the story of Nikki is actually quite chilling, and it is a sad story, given that she was killed by her own two daughters. So I'm going to give a brief history on Nikki. Nikki was actually born in prison. Her mother at the time of her birth was serving a custodial sentence for a drug-related matter, and as such, Nikki was basically raised by her grandmother, who reportedly had a tough time raising Nikki. According to records, Nikki was pretty much allowed to do most things and did not grow up under a strict parental supervision. In fact, one of her best friends, who has now written a book on Nikki's case, spoke about how Nikki was basically able to come and go as she pleased whilst under her grandmother's care. Now, the lifestyle that she was leading at the time resulted in Nikki becoming pregnant at the age of 17. This was while she was dealing with a man who was already in a committed relationship. So so Nikki found herself pregnant, and she found that she was going to be having twins that she would later name Jazz and Taz. So the man in question, he apparently did not want to have anything to do with Nikki or the children, and one of the main reasons being that, well, he did not want his lying and cheating ways to be exposed. But so the girls, Jazz and Taz, were reportedly living with Nikki's grandmother, who are the children's great-grandmother. Yeah, so they did so for about 12 years, and it is said that by this time, Nikki wanted to give her girls the absolutely best. I mean, it only makes sense, really, as a parent. You would most certainly want your children to have a better lifestyle to the one that you had growing up. So yeah, so Nikki wanted the best for her girls. Taz and Yaz were actually described as having nothing but the best growing up. They were placed in dance and music classes, and they apparently always had like the best brand of clothing. They always had their heads all nicely done. They basically looked like a typical clean princess, like the princess look that most parents to young girls do. So so apparently when it came to her girls, it was always like a celebration, and the girls were also very smart, and they even had hopes of basically one day going to Harvard University. So Nikki is said to have not wanting her daughters to go down the path that she went on, so she made a decision to move out of her neighborhood with her girls to about 20 miles away, and this was to Georgia, where they could have the advantages that eluded her. So why are we here? Well, apparently, once the girls started secondary school, it all just started going downhill. I mean, everything was dramatically diverted. They reportedly found it very difficult to hear and accept the word no. By this point, Nikki was becoming more stern with them, and I guess just trying to be a parent. Now, I will give my opinion of this a little bit for later on, but anyways, so the girls, they bitterly resented their mother's now authoritarian approach, and there was one incident when their rage just boiled over after Nikki took Taz's phone. Nikki took Taz's phone when she realized that the 14-year-old was in some kind of relation with a 17-year-old boy. So from that point, she decided that no, the girls, they could not stay on their phones all night or be out all night. So she started just being a little bit more strict with the girls. It said that it became kind of like a battle between the mother and her teenage daughters, and by this point Nikki was pretty much losing control of the girls. So I'm going to be placing a clip of a phone call that Nikki made to the police one time after discovering that one of her daughters had basically snuck out the house in the middle of the night to meet a boyfriend. So here, check that one out.
Where's your emergency? I just woke up and my daughter's gone at the house. How old is your daughter? Oh, Lord, 13.
I mean, you can just hear the absolute terror in Nikki's voice as she made this phone call. I mean, waking up not knowing where your teenage daughter is, it's just, it would be very concerning and, very disturbing as well. So whilst researching on this case, I came across several officers who had actually been to the home, and this was after there had been a police call out, and some of them had actually described the place as being, a really well put together with some of the best household goods. There was a police call out one time, and one of the officers just recalled being told by the girls that they wanted to return back to their great-grandmother's home, where the rules were clearly relaxed. So Nikki confirmed this, in fact, and told the officers that the girls just wanted their way, but that it was not going to happen. The officer eventually left, and although she described the girl as being sweet and innocent looking, she did say that she had this unsettling feeling as she looked into Nikki's face. She said that there was like fear written all over Nikki's face. She apparently presented as someone who was scared of the girls, especially as she knew that the girls basically worked together, so they had each other's backs, so that kind of made Nikki feel some type of way. Now I don't know about you, but I just can't imagine being a parent and being scared of my own child, but so this was the reality that Nikki was living in. Anyway, so back to the story. So to this officer, she said that she sensed that whatever situation that she was leaving, she sensed that it was not entirely over. So she decided to hang around the area, and and looking back on it, that is actually good that she did, because she said that within minutes she heard screaming, and this was coming in the direction of for Nikki's home. She said she basically returned, there was another call to the police, and luckily that went straight to her. So she returned to the address, and it was reported by Nikki that the girls had jumped her and had started beating on her. I mean, so she managed to get away, and that's how she was able to make the call to the police. So the officer spoke about, Nikki just looking hysterical, and, telling her what Yaz and Taz had done to her shortly after the officer had left. But the girls, on the other hand, now told a completely different story. Now, they claimed that Nikki had become, abusive to them, and that Nikki was telling them that they were not going anywhere, that they would not be going to see their great-grandmother the following day, as they had said to the officer. But I think the police officer said, just looking at the evidence and stuff, like looking at the physical evidence, there was nothing to suggest that, Nikki had been the aggressor, but rather Nikki had possibly been the victim of assault, because she had all these scratches all over her. Meanwhile, the girls seemed to have nothing on them, and they just had this really calm demeanor, which was quite disturbing to the officer. So the girls were subsequently charged for assault on their mother, and that was about it with that case. Now, within about 2 years of all this, the girls and their mum had actually been to court numerous times. This was all about basically Nikki trying to have her daughters back in her care. So so she had gone to court quite a few times. Basically, the girls didn't want to live with Nikki anymore. They wanted to live with their great grandmother, and despite everything that had gone on, Nikki was just adamant that she wanted to have her girls living with her in this new and a much better neighborhood, because again, remember, she didn't want her girls to go down the path that she had gone on. So that was what was happening with the court situation. Now, the next time that the police would be called to the home, it was reported that the girls were just like in panic. So a call was made to the police, and one of the girls, I believe it was Yaz, had approached the officer, and basically she seemed really upset, and she was just like, shouting and screaming. She actually left the compound of the home and went and met the officer, and she basically told the officer that her mother had been killed. Now, this was like much later in the day, and the girls had just returned home from school. So when the officer went to check on to check the situation, they found Nikki in the bathtub. She was in a pile of blood, and they wondered, who could have possibly done such a horrendous act. I mean, the property just had like blood everywhere, like in terms of the living room and stuff. So they saw that, and then so one of the girls had claimed to the officer that they just returned from school, and that while she was making her way to the kitchen, she noticed that the house was covered in blood, and she went over to investigate, and then that's when she found that her mum was dead in the bathtub. So the girls, if you watch the interviews, I mean, I've watched quite a few interviews of them. I'll put some of them in the description below. But you can see them crying and just, speaking so softly, like they just sounded like innocent babies, And according to police documents, Nikki was reportedly stabbed at least 80 times with a kitchen knife, and that her spinal cord was almost severed. So so despite the history between Nikki and her girls, the police just couldn't believe that, they just didn't see the girls as suspects initially. They just looked at them as being these two petite teenagers. They just didn't think that they were capable of committing such a violent, vicious crime. I mean, when you look at the girl's appearance, the first thing that they were thinking was that, the girls looked harmless. I mean, these two girls, in my opinion, are like the perfect candidate for, the phrase where they say looks can be very deceiving. I mean, that's what it was with these girls, because when you looked at them, you just wouldn't think that they were capable of carrying such a horrendous act. Anyways, yeah, so from watching the police interviews, you can see the police actually consoling the girls, in an attempt to comfort them. I think at what was clearly a difficult time for them. So yeah, so the police looked at, possible suspects, which actually included the girl's biological father, but he actually had a solid alibi. It was reported that he was living in Canada at the time of the murder, and it just wasn't possible for him to go down to carry it out. The girls later also informed the police that their mother had two boyfriends. Now, this got the police thinking, is there a possible love triangle that might have sparked this murder? So NIKKI, at the time of her death, she was living with a much older gentleman called Robert, but she was also dealing with another gentleman called Joe. So now the girls had indicated to the police that Robert had basically overheard NIKKI speaking to Joe the night before the murder, and they claimed that Robert had confronted NIKKI about her infidelity. So the police also recalled one of the girls attempting. So now, when they were taking the girls to the police station, the police recalled seeing one of the girls attempting to bite their lower arms. It's like, so obviously they saw that and they're thinking, wait, what's going on? They asked the girl to stop, and then they asked her, they asked her to stop. Then they asked her why she was doing it. At that point, she basically explained that, this was a habit of hers, particularly when she was upset. So, they thought, okay, given the current circumstances, maybe it's possible that she was telling the truth. So anyways, yeah, so they paid no mind to it, and then they just carried on going to the station. Now, there was another disturbing behavior, and this was when one of the officers asked if there was anything that they could do to help make things just a little bit better for the girls. And this is so crazy, but the girls' response was that if they could watch CSI. I don't know, but this just, how bizarre is that? That is just so bizarre. That you've just found that your mother has been brutally murdered. They're asking what could they do to help to make you feel a little bit better. Obviously they can't make it completely better, but yeah, they ask you that, and the first thing you say is that you want to watch CSI. I mean, how bizarre is that? Not please do everything you can to catch my mother's killer, nothing like that, but rather you want to watch CSI. Anyways, by this point, another officer had also noticed that something was really odd with the girls, and his suspicion only intensified. And when the grandmother of NIKKI basically started also having suspicions, it was reported that whilst the girl were making the sounds of crying and sounding like they were so traumatized, all that, apparently there were no tears. And when officers asked them to describe their mother as well, they apparently did not really have much nice things to say about their mum, and they were quite vulgar in their descriptions. And so that just only raised further suspicions. And later on, the officers also noticed that the girls still had on their gloves, and they had really long cardigans. So their arms were all covered up, still wearing gloves. And by this point, they were in a room which was quite warm. So it was a bit weird as to why they still had on gloves. So anyways, at this point, the officers asked them to take off their gloves and to pull up their cardigans so that they could take pictures of their hands and their arms. Back at the house as well, they noticed that the sinks were very clean. I mean, considering how violent the attack was, they found it a bit strange that the sinks had been wiped clean. They found shoes in the girls' closet as well that had blood drops on them, and in Taz's room they actually found a shoebox with a pair of boots. Now these boots had significant amount of blood on them, and there was a clump of hair that had clearly been pulled out of someone's head or wrapped in tissue hidden in the toe area of the shoe. And I mean, talk about suspects. But yeah, so later on, whilst in an interrogation room, knowing that they were being recorded, you see that Taz looked directly into a camera, and oh my, does she perform? I mean, a true monologue there. She just starts saying all these things that it's like, you know, who wants to do this? This person is really selfish. I mean, she's really performing, considering that she had been to drama school and stuff like that, so clearly she knew what she was doing. But it was just very suspect. And I think upon closer investigation, the officers also realized that the girls had lied to them. Now earlier they claimed that they had missed their school bus and that they had walked to school on the day of the murder, but it was actually discovered that they hadn't walked to school, but rather they hitched a ride, and that they actually got to school much later than they had claimed. At this point, the police were starting to catch on to them, and the girls began to realize this. So they actually started getting angry with the police, and they just became very uncooperative with them. Detectives had resorted to their usual tactics, whereby there were separate co-defendants. So they did that with them and apparently wore them down, but it just wasn't enough. And with only circumstantial evidence at this point, the police had to basically let them go. So the girls were released to their great-grandmother, and for 4 good months, these girls reportedly led a very normal life. They even went to their school prom. Yeah, I know. Yeah, they went to their school prom. But little did they know that police were actually testing all the evidence and quietly building their case. There was a tricky part to this, in the sense that because they are twins, they share the same DNA. So although the blood found on some of the items were a match to the girls, police just couldn't tell which one of them it belonged to. And according to police statements as well, Nikki actually did not go without a fight. She actually left evidence on one of the girls. Now, remember earlier I talked about Taz biting herself while she was in the police car. It is believed that she was actually trying to disguise a bite mark that Nikki had left on her. Forensic evidence matched the bite marks that was on Taz's arm to Nikki's teeth. They also found human hair in between Nikki's teeth, which matched the girls. It suggested that, you know, one of them at some point had Nikki from behind, and, you know, during the assault, she must have grabbed onto one of their arms, bit it, hoping that they would let go of her, stop doing whatever they were doing to her at the time. At this point, police had just had a lot of evidence against the girls, and on their last day of school, they were both arrested. Now, the girls' demeanors at this point had just changed, and they presented in a more arrogant and disrespectful manner. Now, in my view, they probably realized that the game was up for them, and that they no longer needed to pretend to be these sweet, innocent looking girls. The girls were charged with murder and aggravated assault of their mother. And for almost 4 years, they remained quiet whilst waiting trial. But just before trial was set to start, they each confessed to the brutal attack and murder of their mother. And I will put in a confession clip in this video, so watch this part now.
I think I picked up a knife and I stabbed her.
Where did you stab her?
I think I stabbed her in her stomach. It was multiple times. I think I had her hands, and she has her feet. Kind of like a joint effort. She was heavy. We just put it in. The water was turned on.
At some point in time, you did realize that morning your mom was dead.
Yeah, so you just saw that. Now, as part of a deal with the state to avoid trial, the girls pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, for which they each received 30 years in prison. The question now that many people actually wanted to know was what had actually happened on the day in question. Like, what actually happened to Nikki? And by the girls' account, they said that they stayed up until about 3 o'clock in the morning, and that when the time came for them to get up for school, they just didn't want to. Obviously, they had been up all night. Now mum is trying to get them to get up and get themselves ready for school. Remember, the girls have been quite difficult to live with at this point, so I could only imagine what Nikki was thinking at the time when she tried to tell them that they needed to get themselves ready for school. It is possible that Nikki may have been quite persistent, and in my view, this triggered the girls and led to this vicious confrontation. And it was reported that after killing Nikki, the girls had spent some time trying to clean up the house, but in hope of them building an alibi, they stopped partway and so that they can make an appearance in school. And then I'm guessing that the plan was for them to go to school, be seen, and then later on go home and finish with the cleaning. But this never happened. Now, another disturbing factor of this case is that investigators found journals which belonged to the girls, and just by reading the journals, they found that this act was clearly premeditated. They found several notes in them, basically, where the girls were just going on about how much they hated their mother, how much they wanted her gone. And there was one particular note which read that if they didn't get rid of her soon, they might not be able to do it at all. I mean, this is just so outrageous. This is crazy. It was clearly an act of rage, and reports this suggest as well that Nikki might have tried to get out of the house but then was dragged back in by the girls. I mean, one of the neighbors recalled hearing his doorbell going off and someone yelling, but he did say that he was in bed and that by the time he went to check, there was nobody there. So, well, at this point, I'm guessing that Nikki would have been dragged back into the house. I mean, this is just so sad for her last few moments of life to have been with those girls, you know. I mean, just looking into their eyes, knowing that you're being killed by the two people that you have brought into this world it's just crazy, and it's just really heartbreaking for a parent to see that the person who is causing them the harm is one of the people that are supposed, two of the people that are supposed to be looking out for you. But either way, family, you look out for each other. So the fact that, she's being taken out of this world by her own family is just crazy. Yeah, so just a quick final thoughts, really. I mean, I acknowledge that, Nikki had not actually played the active parental role in her daughter's lives, sooner. But the truth of the matter is that, once you realize that history might be starting to repeat itself, she did take action. She moved them from where they were living into a better neighborhood, with the view of, giving them a fresh start. But it's just, I guess by that point, it was just a bit too late, because the girls had, developed, they were much older now. They had, experienced having male attention. She just didn't have that control. So the thought of her thinking that she could go away with not one, but two of them, and hoping that, she can have a fresh start with her girls. I mean, yeah, so, she has been described as being like, the life of a party. She was really into the whole socializing, being out with different guys, like, being quite promiscuous, all that. But when it came down to it, she was ready to let go of all that and, give her children, give her girls the best possible things this life has to offer. She did engage in counseling. She participated in parental classes. She did whatever the courts were requesting her to do in order to have her daughters returned to her, really. And it's just sad that it's ended in the way that it did. I mean, like, looking back on it, people will say, do you think that, she should have fought so hard to have the girls back? And to be honest, my view is, I think yeah, because as a parent, like, just to sit back and watch your children go through, basically to repeat history, when you know that the outcome is not going to be a good one, you just can't sit back. I just can't see any, I don't know any parent who will sit back knowing that their child is just making really bad decisions and, and they just act like they can't see what's going on. She was just trying to stop history from repeating itself, just that cycle of that teenage pregnancy. She's trying to avoid all that. And unfortunately, she was just unsuccessful. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for hanging in here with me and listening to me for this long. But I really do appreciate it. If you haven't already hit that like and subscribe button, please do. And hit the notification bell as well so that you know when I upload a new video. Thank you once again, and I will speak to you all soon. If you haven't done so already, guys, do tell someone that you love them. Let them know, because we just never know what tomorrow may bring. And I want to use this opportunity to remind us all that. Take care.